Hey guys, welcome back to Tabletop Glory. My name is Graham Johnson, and today we're going to be talking about terrain. Now I'm going to be doing a little bit of basing as well with this, and you'll see why in a moment. Now today we were doing basing and terrain because that is what you guys asked for over in the discussion section. You see, I recently unlocked the ability to do straw polls, and I thought it would be a really great way to get more feedback on the type of content you guys would like to see. As always, you can feel free to leave your comments down below and ask for specific types of tutorials or even request specific types of content. In the meantime, let's go ahead and crack on with today's video, and let's talk a little bit about how we can make things look like stone even when not painting with stone colors. So starting off, we're going to be taking some clips from last week's video because I'm just going to be doing it pretty much across the whole thing, and I'll show a little bit of that in a moment. But we're basically doing a dry brush of our moot green on top of either Stegodon scale, if that's what you have, or Incubi darkness. Those colors work really well for this technique. Now this is a technique that I enjoy doing to kind of get a bit of a warp stone glow. But any kind of a off dark color, and what I mean by that is not quite black but a noticeable color. In this case with Incubi darkness, it's not a black, it's a green black or a blue black, and then you can go ahead and layer other similar colors on top of it. And that does a really great way of replicating stone when we choose really bright colors, or even vibrant if you want to use that term. So a really good example of this would be if you were to take Cantor blue and then maybe put a few washes of Nuln oil on top of that to really darken it down, and then use Fenrisian gray instead of moot green like we've done here, you would get a very similar effect. So it's a really great way to use similar colors from your army to paint your terrain while still looking like what the terrain is meant to look like. Another great tip when it comes to working with your terrain is anywhere where there's a nice sharp hard edge, you're going to have a pop of color. Take a broken brick as example. If you wanted to paint the edge of a broken brick, you might use a lot of orange because that sharp edge is either going to reflect a lot of light, or that fresh broken edge is going to be a completely different color from the outside edge of the brick where all the weathering has taken place. And so when we apply that to terrain and we start looking at things like brick and stone or even painted surfaces, anywhere where you've got this nice hard sharp edge where the weather is going to be weathering down that terrain, where all of your snow and rain and whatever have you is going to wear down those edges, you're going to end up with these nice bright pops of color. And we can knock this down a little bit with some of our weathering later on if you don't end up liking it. You could use things like weathering pigments as well, and that'll kind of knock down all of this edge highlighting, but it's important to get it on there now because if you decide you want to add more later, it's going to be more difficult. So we want to go ahead and knock that out early on. Now, in my personal opinion, less is more when it comes to terrain, so we've kind of skipped beyond doing any additional colors. However, if you had any metallics that you wanted to add, now would be the time to do so. I end up changing the roof to copper later down the road, but we'll talk about that when it happens and why it happens. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and add some basing paste around the bottom. Now, I have just made my base here out of tongue depressors. I've cut them up to fit in this rough square shape around the bottom and then curved around my edges with a hobby knife. Now I am being sparing with this because it can be pretty expensive to work with your terrain, and I do have a recipe for making similar stuff to Sterling Mud in bulk that I typically use for my terrain. However, I wanted to show how I would use the product in a sparing manner to use with terrain so that those of you at home who may not know how to make Sterling Mud from scratch can see a really great way of using these products without just wasting an entire bottle on a piece of terrain. And so as you can see here, I'm kind of making sure that I have 1 to 2 inch gaps minimum between each patch of this Sterling Mud, and then what we're going to do is we're going to fill the rest of that in using things like flocking, whether it be foam flocking or static grass. So I went to go apply lacquer to my piece here to protect it, because today's video was originally going to be about weathering our terrain. However, my lacquer fogged, and when I went to go wash it down to remove the lacquer, it took a lot of the paint on that side of the building with it. You really see the difference between the nice bright green on one side and the very muted and, dare I say, stripped down looking green on the other side. And it was at this point I knew I needed to come up with some kind of a fix, and I didn't want to repaint the entire building. So I decided to go ahead and add some copper metallics to the roof. It'll also help it blend in with some of the other graveyard pieces that I have as well. I felt the need to include this mistake and the repair here in the video where it happened, as I feel it's really important for us to learn from one another's mistakes, especially if those mistakes were not anything that we could have controlled. Having a can of primer or having a can of dull coat or even a gloss coat that fogs can be one of the most disastrous things that happens, especially if you spent a lot of time painting a model. And so I wanted to show that it does happen to everybody, as well as there's always options for how to fix that. So I'm going ahead and placing copper across the roof, and we'll cut back when that's done. Agrex Earthshade is going to be your friend. Now I'm going to show you a mistake that I see a lot of people who work on terrain doing, especially with roofs when it comes to weathering, is they just kind of apply it all in one go like this, and what that does is it causes your wash to run and pool and coffee stain, but not in the places where we want it, in those cracks and those crevices, and then you end up applying more and more of the product, and you get a little bit more effect, but you end up with all of this staining at the bottom of the tiles. So if you can flip your piece around and lay it down to do it, go ahead and do that, because then you end up with the wash basically doing as it's intended and settling in the recesses, which in our case is the tops of each of these little diamond tiles, and it's going to keep that wash where we want it, and it's going to keep the places where we want darker without us having to put anywhere near as much wash on the model. And this works great for all kinds of sculpted shingles. And in any case, especially when working with armor, sometimes even laying the model down while it's hooked into your painting handle can really help you to keep the wash where you want it, and it makes it so you don't have to put anywhere near as many coats of that wash on. Now I'm doing a little bit of a dry brush here with some more Screaming Bell, which was my original color. Now if I wanted things to be a bit more vibrant, I would go with Vallejo Air Color Copper. It's a much more vibrant, much more bright, high polished copper. You can even do some edge highlighting like we did at the very beginning with the Moot Green, using that copper as well. Now if I wanted a less subtle transition than what I ended up here with, I could have done this while the wash was still wet, and it would have actually given us a bit of a streaking type effect to this as well. Now here you can see me using a product called Nylock Oxide. Now I've watered mine down almost to a 50-50 mixture. Now if you want to do the same, I highly recommend getting something like a contrast medium, or at the very least a glaze medium, to kind of do this. And what you can see is I'm just kind of almost stippling it in places, wiping it down with my thumb, doing this over and over again so that I end up with some super bright spots in some places and some dull spots in another. Now another technique that we can do is anywhere we think water would run, like basically right across the very top and maybe along the sides and a few miscellaneous panels, we could also do some water streaking, which is the exact same with this color, same way that you would do like rush streaks. And I'll show you guys how to do that a little bit later when I do some more weathering, but I want to go ahead and get some dull coat on this that isn't going to ruin this project, just to kind of lock everything down, as one of the side effects of 3D prints is it doesn't hold paint very well. And I remembered that at this point in the project because I was actually wiping the paint off with my hands, even with my gloved hand. I actually put the glove on to try to protect this model, and it wasn't doing me any good. So I took a break from painting after I put that clear coat on and did a little bit of basing, but I'm gonna go ahead and insert a clip of me doing the streaks here. So one of the big tips I want to pass on when it comes to streaking is that less is more, but also to use the exact same amount of pressure that you would use when dry brushing. We don't want to be putting tons of paint on, and it's okay if you're going to wipe a little off, but wipe in the direction you want the streak to go. In the case here, we're going down, so if I wanted to wipe a little bit off, or I wanted to drag out a streak, or maybe I put a little too much paint on, I wipe in the direction I want the streak to go, so that way whatever paint is left on continues in that direction. Also, in the case of this roof, I'm really kind of accentuating those cracks and crevices, especially in places where I want to put a lot of that wash in, and I want to make sure that there is plenty of pigment in those cracks and crevices, so it makes sense as to why I'm getting the streaking where I'm getting the streaking. And here we go with some basing. Now, it's important to keep in mind I'm using a very fine foam flock here to do these vines on the side of the building. And I'm using about 50-50 watered down PVA glue, and that's what's allowing me to kind of manipulate it a bit better than what most people might be able to. Now, some people don't like watering their glue down like I do. I think it helps to soak into that foam flock a whole lot better and get a lot more grip. It does take a lot longer to dry and to set, so sometimes you have to set your project down and come back to it later. But on a small project like this, for as little as we're doing, it's not the end of the world. Now, I am going to be using a lot of Woodland Scenic products today, and some of them are going to be mixed together. Now, in the case of this, I am using fine burnt grass. You can see I do an excellent job at getting it all over my hand and not the glue, but that's absolutely fine. So we're going to do a few of these little vines all over, as well as using a bit of my custom dirt blend. You can see there in the bottom right hand corner. That is a blend of two different brands actually. That is Hobby Lobby's brand Burnt Grass Foam Flock, as well as Woodland Scenic's Foam Flock Burnt Grass. And we're also going to be using a little bit of the static grass, the yellow Woodland Scenic static grass. I see a lot of people refer to that one as dead grass, mixed in with some of their dark green and a little bit of white static grass that I have accumulated through wish.com of all places. And that gives us a nice little blend of this dead but not quite dead grass kind of blend that I got going on here, that I will be applying across my entire graveyard diorama when I get around to doing it. And what you can see me doing here is I'm just blowing away all the excess that has kind of curled over the edge, and what that's going to do is it's going to help neaten up the edge a little bit, but it's also going to make it so that we don't end up just leaving tons of this static grass on every table we put our terrain on. And there we have it, guys. I'm sorry today's video was a bit short, especially after last week's video being as long as it was. I know you guys enjoy the longer format videos, but like I said, I have been feeling just god-awful this week, and I needed an easy, fun project that I could just knock out in a day. And I hope you guys enjoy this as kind of like a prelude to what is to come. I've got a lot of cool terrain projects that I'm working on. Unfortunately, they are going to take some time to film, and some of them is working with MDF and improving MDF kits in little ways that are easy for everyone to do, that you don't need something crazy like a Proxxon to be able to accomplish. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for all the love and support. It is insane how much this channel has grown in the last 2 months. I'm just flabbergasted, and I'm really proud to be a part of this, and I'm really glad that you guys are here. So thank you very much. In any case, may your display case always be overfilled and your pile of shame never run empty. Until next time.